best done that, and what in within the availability and things that you're allowed to say? Like, what are some practical tips to help coaches do those things in the weight room and on the field or on the court?
So most, the wonderful thing about coaches is they understand the game, right? So the way I look at this is like, what does this athlete need when I watch the game? Because they're all on the sidelines, they're all on the benches watching the game, and then talk to the coaching staff about what they actually need, and then find out from the coaching staff, he's struggling to do this and that, and then implement that into your program.
How
And
often
that
is
for
it
me,
always physical, not something just like psychological
well,
in their brain?
listen, I think psychological is a massive part of what goes on with any athlete at any level, hugely. And I think strength coaches do a great jobs of mentoring, supporting um, that side of the sort of mental aspect and making people, get more grit and be tougher. Because at the end of the day, that's something that comes out from training and being in a weight room and pushing your body. Like that helps 100%. That helps on what they do on the field. If you can bench and squat and do X and Y, you're going to feel like Superman walking on the field, 100%. But what also helps is something specific to what the coaching staff are seeing that you could perhaps implement. It might be hand-eye coordination. It might be the ability to react quicker. It might be the ability to decelerate quicker. And therefore, like I said, each of these individuals need different things. Different positions need different things. And I think if there's one message I probably could put across to your listeners here is to actually look at each of the different positions that these players play and implement a specific program for those positions. If you haven't got time to do it on a one-to-one basis, look at the positional players and look at the program that you're putting together for the positional players and be specific around what the coaching staff are saying that these players need. And that's where I would start. And then the second part is the movement, is to look at movement screening and look at implementing things that you find on a movement screen for an individual, as well as the past medical history of that individual, into their daily warm-up, prehab, workouts, whatever. And that's how I'd go about this.
For somebody that has worked with a high level athlete with an Achilles injury, Aaron Rodgers obviously hurt his.
Mm.
How important? Let's start with surface. Training surface is a hot topic in the NFL. In your personal opinion, does it matter?
So I don't think there's enough evidence on it, but I do think that there's a difference between those two surfaces. And I think if you're playing on those both surfaces, going back to the specifics, right, then what you should do is you should train on both those surfaces,
Yeah.
right? Is you should practice how you play. And for instance, some teams would practice on a what we call in the UK astroturf, right, or field turf, and some teams would practice on normal turf. But if one week you're playing normal turf and the next week you're playing on field turf, you have to be able to adapt and train on both. And therefore, anything that you do, whether it's a cut, a deceleration, your body has to adapt and get used to that surface that you're going to play on. And perhaps teams do not do that. They just use what they've got to practice what they're doing. So if I was in charge and we were playing on a field turf, then that whole week for me, we would be practicing on field turf. We wouldn't be practicing on turf. And then the following week, if we're playing on turf, we would be practicing on turf.
Yeah, no, that makes more
So,
sense than just changing
you know,
the entire surface
yeah,
of games. Yeah.
right. I mean, listen, the debate of ACLs and injuries from different types of surfaces, there's not enough research out there to specifically say, yeah, it causes problems. But if you talk to the athletes, they believe, and they're pretty good judges, they're good judges of their bodies. Their belief is that, there is a fundamental difference between playing on one type of surface than another. And some athletes who've got injured on that particular type of surface will say it's that surface that's caused this problem. So I think I think as leagues and organisations, they need to sort of do more research on that. But my view would be, if you're not going to change it, i.e. the league's not going to change the type of surface you're playing on, you've got to prepare and adapt to what you're actually doing.
What about this whole notion where Aaron is talking about wanting to come back sooner? And I'm looking at it through the lens of, I had an athlete rupture their Achilles in October after a bye week and trained with that person. And at the end of the spring ball, I mean, they were doing fantastic things. So credit to the athlete, credit to the athletic trainer and myself for how we collaborated and worked. So I've seen things and I've heard about the Cam Akers things. Again, from your experience looking at this thing outside looking in, what are your thoughts?
So you can't, human nature and healing, right, is there for a reason. And the way that the body heals in, say, for instance, an Achilles perspective, is that it needs to lay down collagen. It needs to lay down scar tissue that will adapt to mature. And then whatever we do as coaches will adapt and mold that scarring, right? That's how tissue repairs. But there's a time scale. And no matter what you do, that time scale is there for a reason. Like that collagen matures from, whether it's type 1, type 2 collagen lay down, it then goes into maturity and it continues to mature months past the athlete actually getting back on the field. But no matter what we do, whether it's surgical, machine intervention, manual therapy, strength and conditioning, whatever it is, we can only speed that up so much.
Yes.
And the notion of time is a great healer is absolutely right. Okay. What we do know about Achilles is that the longer you leave it, the better it's going to be. And the same, for instance, with ACLs, right? So if you look at people who've come back at 6 months or 4 months from an ACL, the reoccurrence of injury rate goes up. The people who come back at 9 months, the reoccurrence rate goes down. So, you're always up against this pressure. Let's get the athlete back. Let's get the athlete performing because they paid the big money in this scenario. But in my view about Aaron Rodgers, he still needs time. And then on top of that, you've got age. Because what we do know is that as the athlete gets older, there's more degeneration within their tendons and their muscles, right? The elasticity changes, the collagen changes over years that we get older, okay? So you've got that into the equation. You've also got however many years, for instance, he's been playing, right? Wear and tear on his body. And that plays a part in his rehabilitation. So again, in someone like that, my view would be that, I'm sure that the Jets and the team around him are doing this, but it needs to be a very holistic view about how you rehabilitate that Achilles. You shouldn't just be thinking about the Achilles. You should be thinking about everything else. And in someone like that, for instance, my view would be you would be looking at the other tendons. So his patellar tendons, his other Achilles tendon, because those will be degenerative for sure. And therefore implementing programs to strengthen that while he's not performing, because while he's not performing, he's detraining. So if you're looking at a return of an athlete, that making sure that they are able to get back and perform at the highest level, of course you're looking at the injury, but you need to be thinking about everything else around that athlete, everything. And looking at all the past medical history and looking at all the issues that they've had from a movement perspective and working on those as well as working on the Achilles. But my view would be, if you're asking me on a time scale, a minimum would be 6 months, minimum. And if you try and push that to get back any earlier, then you're really on a tightrope for failure. It's just whether or not you or him, the athlete, is prepared to take that failure.
And that's something that we've said at Strength Coach Network before is you can't try twice as hard and have a baby in 4.5 months. Like you can't
Yeah,
speed up the actual process of, like you just said, laying down the collagen fibers and having the physiological, morphological changes that need to happen in the body for that to occur.
yeah. I mean, listen, it's the same as strength gains. You know, you need 6 weeks to see strength gains. And if you're making out that you've got strength gains within 2 weeks, it's nothing to do with,
Neurological, yeah. Yeah.
yeah, of course. Well, that's just physiology. So, yeah, of course, you can get overcompensation and you can get neurological input and you can get upside, but that's not the long term goal. And therefore, you've got to understand your anatomy and understand your physiology and implement that into your sort of program design. But I agree with you. You can't, you know, you can only be a magician for so long. And at the end of the day, with all this, right, is it all boils down to the athlete. So you can, take the horse to water, but you can't make the horse drink the water. It's really true. So no matter how much you also try, the athlete has got to take responsibility and ownership on what you're implementing, what they're doing. And all you do is guide them. But I just feel that more communication, better communication, more specifics on player position, movement screen, they would be my real take homes from sort of this conversation today.
You talked about the blind screening. How can
Mm.
people do that if they're working with athletes that they see all the time?
So, uh, listen, if you've got a limited amount of time and you've got a big group in, then that's all about planning. And if you've got three strength coaches in the room, then the view is divide up. excuse me, divide up who's doing what and implement your programs with regard movement and screening. And I would be doing that in the off season. I would be basically making up a profile on each athlete that you've got. And it can be really simple stuff, right? That you just think, okay, like I said before.
What's up, strength coaches? Want to take a quick break from the show to talk to you about our sponsor, Team Builder. Team Builder is your one-stop shop for online training platform needs as a coach. With Team Builder, you're going to be able to program for your athletes whether they're in person or remote. Using Team Builder, not only will you be able to program for your athletes, but there are special features such as the leaderboard and locking training with wellness questionnaires. With the leaderboard, you can have an exercise performed that day, whether it be a lift, a sprint, or a jump, and scores can be updated in real time and projected on a TV in the training. Wellness questionnaires can be used at the beginning of training, and your athletes will have to fill them out prior to being able to train. This ensures that as a coach, you're being able to collect quality data before the athletes train. So, if you're interested in Team Builder, click the link down below and find out more information. Let's get back to the show.
Most people have had an ankle, hamstring, or ACL problem. So your ACL guys are going to do this. Your ankle girls are going to do this, and therefore you're not being specific for the individual athlete, but you're being specific around previous problems that they've had. And just by implementing those into someone's program, you're now being more specific than what you would be if you generalize doing. Today we're doing a 4-week phase of power, and that would be sort of the thing that I would put in very early and follow through, and then go back with your athletic training department and look at your availability stats and see if they actually are improving season on season, and also look at your game stats. So it's not just purely about GPS data.
No, it's not.
Right. So I'll give you an example. It's quite interesting. I was the first guy to bring Catapult into the NBA. When I went to the Knicks from Chelsea, we used GPS from 2002, 2003. And I came to America and no one had ever heard of it. And I went to the league. I remember this. I went to the league and I talked to them about like monitoring what actually happens in the game and looking at it from an injury preventive point of view. And they looked at me as if I was like cuckoo. And the answer back from the lawyers was, I started talking to them about load. And this is a true story. The answer back to me was, well, why don't you weigh them before and after the game? And I looked at the guy and I was like, I don't really think you understand what I'm talking about here. And then let's fast forward now to where we are today, right? But while I was looking at data in the early stages of basketball, and obviously trying to understand the sport, because I'd come from soccer, I started looking at a ton of data, right? And the question then was, well, which data is relevant? And I think what's happening now is people have sort of got on this bandwagon of looking at, let's say, GPS data, and they've forgotten about what the actual original goal is to actually prevent someone from being injured. So you can talk about any type of methodology, and it is methodology, and it's not proven methodology, by the way. Let's say acute chronic work ratio, or Tim Gabbett's work, or any other type of work that you want to do. But you should be relating to, is your injury availability improving or not, season on season? And if it's not, then it's not just purely dependent on acute chronic work ratios, right? So this is like, what the way I look at it is like a big cake, and that is a very small slice of a cake. But the other slices of the cake are the things that we're talking about today, which I think are actually more important than that. And I think what's happening now is that there's been this turn of, let's not necessarily be looking purely at those numbers, and let's actually start looking at other things. And the reason I know this is because I now run a software company called Apollo, and that's what we do. We basically bring all of this information in for teams and organizations to help us, or help them, adapt and understand. So, for instance, we just signed Alabama football, where we're going to bring that information together to let them get a better understanding quickly about all the things that they're doing, from the weight room to the performance side of the game. And I think that's really important. But again, you can be specific with it. And that's the sort of take home that I'm trying to sort of drive it through in this conversation today, Just, is that I don't see enough of that.
How are you guys measuring availability? Is it man game lost due to injury and across the whole team, most important players? How do you guys do it? How do you recommend doing it?
So the way I would do it is, the most important thing is the game.
Amen.
If the player is available to play the game, right? Practice, like, people need practice for sure, and they need to practice to be able to perform. If they don't practice, they're not necessarily going to be able to go out and perform at a weekend, right? So practice is important, but the number one is the availability of the game. The second is, what is it that you can prevent? So a concussion or a direct blow to a knee, there's not much that you can do about that. If you've got a 300-pound lineman tackling you and taking you down, there's not much you can do about that.
Yeah, like AC
right?
sprains too.
Yeah. So you can make them as big and strong as you want, but that force is huge force. So what I would be looking at is, I'd be looking at like the soft tissue side of it. I'd be looking at hamstrings. I'd be looking at groins, calves, tendon issues. That's the area that I'd be looking at, and looking at how can we reduce those numbers, because they're the things in a weight room, for instance, that you can have an effect on. You can have an effect on muscle, you can have an effect on nerve, and you can have an effect on tendon.
Would you say, like hearing you talk about that, would you say that possibly injury prevention is just then injury reduction across time, season to season? Because that seems to be the theme that you keep bringing up, and something that I 100% agree with.
I mean, listen, that's the bottom line. Are they available to play at the weekend? That's all the coach is worried about.
That really is.
Are you available to play? And then the second then is, how well do they play?
But we don't control that.
No, but what I'm trying to sort of get in the conversation is, you can have an effect on it, and
True.
you actually can have more of an effect on it than what you actually believe. And the way that you can have an effect,
dive down that.
Yeah. I mean, look, the way that you can have an effect on it is to talk to your offensive, defensive coaches, talk to your basketball coaches. Like, what is it that this female basketball player needs in the point guard? What is she not doing? Where is she struggling? You know, where's the big struggling? Where's the offensive line struggling? Where is the quarterback struggling? Where are the things that you see? Because at the end of the day, right, even though it's subjective, they're paid and their experiences are there to enhance the performance of the team and the individual. And then if you listen to that and implement that into things that you're doing from the weight room and the training room, and be specific with what they do, and then look at that data, right? And that might be a simple thing like, you know, if you're a wide receiver, like the number of routes, the yardage that you've done, the number of completions that you've done, whatever stat it is that you look at, the stats are there. So if you've got an athlete that's not making that route or not catching that ball, what is it that you can do to improve that and see the change on the actual game from what you're doing in the weight room? And it might be a simple thing like hand-eye reaction times, you know, tennis ball against the wall, or whatever it is, you know, med ball against the trampette, or whatever it is that you do. My view is that's the most important part. It's not the fact that the guy can bench 300 pounds. That's the most important part, right? Is that can he catch that ball in that scenario? And that's the thing that I think this whole sort of silos, and this is the sort of thing that we're trying to do with teams, is try and bring all of those different silos and data sets together to give you a piece of paper to go, these are the things from the game data, these are the things from the GPS data, these are the things from the weight room data, these are the things from the training room movement data. Here it is on one page, and here are the highlights of the things that they need to improve on. And then track it. How is this athlete improving? Or they're not improving. And if they're not improving, then go back to the drawing board and go, okay, so now we need to sort of think about, maybe this isn't working for us. Let's redo this for this particular individual athlete. And there's a constant change in evaluation, whether it's season to season, off season to in season, etc. And that's dependent on how you look at your programs.